So let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome. My name is Chrissy Adamowitz and I am the Sustainable Maine Outreach Coordinator for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. For those of you who are new, NRCM is a nonprofit membership organization protecting, restoring, and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. For 60 years, the Natural Resources Council of Maine has been protecting the places that make Maine so special. NRCM harnesses the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 supporters statewide and beyond. We are lucky to have Vanessa Berry with us today. She is an environmental educator and recycling expert at ecomaine. Vanessa provides education and resources to member communities and residents with the goal of encouraging others to follow the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Vanessa started her career in the public school system, working in special education and overseeing an after-school green team, and transitioned from the classroom to commit a year to serving low-income Mainers through energy efficiency upgrades and education before joining the ecomaine team in 2018. Vanessa also serves on NRCM's Rising Leadership Team, so we're very lucky to have her. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few logistical items. First, today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow so you can share it with your friends and family, and we hope that you do. For the duration of the presentation, your audio will be muted so that background noise doesn't disrupt the presentation. We have also planted some poll questions throughout the presentation so that we can learn from you and keep things a little more interactive. Our colleague Abin McGuire is here to help you with any tech problems that may arise. So if you have a tech problem, feel free to stick it in the chat box and he'll help you get that solved and troubleshoot. After the presentation, we'll have plenty of time for questions. And today's tour has been designed so that you can use your video and ask your questions using your microphone instead of typing them into the chat box. What you will want to do is if you have a question at the end, raise your hand and I will call on your name and unmute your microphone for you. You can ask your question and then I'll mute you again so that Vanessa and I can answer it. If you don't want to do that, you can also stick your question in the chat box. We will also be monitoring that as well. And that's about it. We'll be going through the presentation. You know, maybe we might pause with to ask a relevant question that comes up per slide, but by and large, we'll take them at the end. So if Vanessa, if you're ready, you want to take it away?
Yep, I got to remember to unmute myself, but yes, I'm good to go. Thank you so much, Chrissy, for the introduction, and thanks for having us and giving ecomaine a platform to kind of talk about this, you know, this industry and everything that we are doing at ecomaine. And so basically, just in summary, to let folks know what to expect, I'm going to talk a little bit about ecomaine and, you know, how we got started and you know, why we do the things that we do. And then I'm going to really dive into a virtual tour of the facility. So I've got videos in the presentation to share with you to show you exactly how we sort all of the recycling that comes into our building. If you have questions, I'm hoping that we'll answer them during the presentation. But if you have other questions, feel free to save them, write them in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And then at the end, we're also going to kind of talk about how recycling relates to other work that NRCM is doing and potential policy that could be in place to help support ecomaine's efforts, as well as the municipalities and the Maine taxpayers. So we'll get into that later. But yeah, just a brief summary and we'll get right into it. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to start with a poll question just to make sure everybody's paying attention right out of the gate. We have a list of items that are going to pop up in that poll. And I want to know what you think is recyclable at ecomaine or not. So you'll get that list and you'll just check off the items that you think are recyclable and you know, leave them blank if you don't think they are. And we'll revisit this question later after the presentation.
All right, I've started the poll. We'll give it about 15 more seconds. There's a lot of tricky ones in here.
I know.
Looks like people are really thinking hard about it, which is good. It's a hard mix of responses. Okay, I'm going to end it. And Vanessa, I'll share the results at the end.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Yep.
So we're gonna hide the results for now.
And we'll go over it too. If maybe you said something's recyclable and it's not. I hope that we'll learn that over this time that we spend together today. But we'll go through them at the end, and I can explain, why we might take something and not take something else. So we'll clear all of these up. And if you have questions about them, again, I encourage you to ask for sure. So we'll keep on going. ecomaine is a municipally owned nonprofit. So that's something that's pretty unknown to a lot of people. We're a nonprofit organization and we're owned by towns. We're owned by 20 Maine municipalities. A lot of them are located in the greater Portland area, but we've got some kind of outliers. I'll show you a map in just a moment of all of our towns. And basically we were tasked with managing all of their municipal solid waste and their recyclables. So we've got 3 facilities that help us do that. One, we've got a waste to energy power plant where we are combusting municipal solid waste at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. We treat all of the subsequent pollution. So what comes out of our stacks is about 96% water vapor. It's just steam leaving the building. And we reduce the amount of trash by volume by 90%. So we also have our single sort recycling facility, which you guys are going to get to get a sneak peek inside the plant today and see exactly how we operate in all of those bits of equipment and all of that good stuff. So we got a single sort recycling facility that processes recycling for about 35,000 tons each year. And our trash, we get quite a bit more. We get 175,000 tons of trash. But when we burn it, we're making it much, much smaller. And then we're sending it over to our Asheville landfill facility, which is only a couple miles down the road. So yeah, they're all located in the greater Portland area. Our waste to energy power plant and recycling facility are located kind of right on the border at the outer Congress over by the Jetport and the shopping mall and all that good stuff. So we're kind of juxtapositioned on outer Congress out there. You can actually see our stacks from Highway 95. So if you're ever driving down 95, you look on the side of the highway, you see those big tall stacks. That's ecomaine burning all that trash and making electricity. And then our Asheville landfill is kind of on like the Scarborough, South Portland, Westbrook line. So it's right just a couple miles down the street, but it's in a different town technically. So here's the map of our service area. And what I want to know next, and I'm going to ask you guys to type your answers into the chat, is are you an ecomaniac or not? So which ecomaine community do you live in? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to hear, kind of where our audience is coming from. So feel free to, just introduce yourself and let us know what town you live in. And that gives me a better idea of, what your program looks like. Maybe you have a different collection than somebody else. Already getting lots of responses. So thank you guys so much. All right, so some Portland residents, some folks from Old Orchard Beach. That's where I live. Somebody from Woolwich, from Pownell and Wyndham and Cumberland.
Yeah. People from all over, it's great.
All over the state. We've got even somebody from Hudson Valley, New York, and from Biddeford. Very cool. So there's some folks that might not be ecomaine communities yet, but that's okay. You'll learn a lot about how this process works. And if you've got a single stream recycling and maybe it doesn't come to us, but it goes to another facility, they're going to use a lot of the same types of equipment to sort out and process stuff. But their acceptable materials might be a little bit different. So you'll definitely want to make sure that if you're not recycling with ecomaine, you want to make sure that you're looking up the rules for your program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later too, as one of my recommendations for folks. But if your material is coming to us, all of this education is going to be relevant to you. And this is exactly what we're doing to your stuff. So it brings it really home. for a lot of folks who may not know right now where their trash and recycling go and how it gets handled. So I'll move on from that, but thank you guys so much for, participating in the chat. I appreciate it. So a little bit of a timeline of our trash. I'll talk about EcoMaine's history and how we became EcoMaine, because we didn't start out as EcoMaine. We started out as regional waste systems, and we were started by 4 municipalities back in 1976. Those 4 towns, they were doing away with their old dumps, and they were looking for a regional approach to dealing with waste. They knew landfilling wasn't going to be the ultimate solution forever. So what they did was they purchased a jointly owned landfill, and they did that for a little while. And then in 1988, they established the waste to energy power plant with 16 other towns. So we got 20 municipalities all together. They put in a huge financial investment, and that's why there are owners today. They're all represented on our board of directors, and they make all of our executive decisions about budgeting and how, what the long-term vision is of the company. So when you think about the values of EcoMaine, you have to think about the values of our 20 towns, which is really cool. So they started the waste to energy power plant in 1988. We started burning, household trash. And for 2 years or so, that building that we created as a transfer station of sorts for our trash to go to landfill, it stayed vacant for a little bit. But in 1990, we decided we were going to repurpose that facility and use it to process recyclables. And so it kind of became a transfer station for recycling, where the trash would go in and it would get burned in the other building. We would take the recyclables, we'd bale them up, and we'd find homes for it so it could be turned into new and useful things. So we've been doing that since 1990, but the process has changed a little bit. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, we were doing source separated recycling. And some of you may remember that process, which is, you have to have a separate bin in your house for your paper, for your cardboard, for your glass, for your different types of plastics. And there were lots of barriers that prevented people from participating in those programs. So we took away a lot of those barriers in 2006 under our brand new name, EcoMaine, which is a little bit cuter than Regional Waste Systems. But that's when we kicked off our single sort recycling technology. And we were actually the first in the state to do that. So another cool little fun fact, EcoMaine brought single sort to the state of Maine. And it made it much, much easier for others to participate. It made collection more efficient because you just needed one truck to take your recycling and you didn't need a bunch of different compartments. And we were able to grow our member communities quite a bit after that point. So from 2006 to the present, we've actually expanded. It says we've got more than 65 municipalities. Right now we have 70, and hopefully we'll get some more over time. I'm seeing some people who are saying they're trying to become an EcoMaine community, and we'd love to have them on board. Because the more recycling tonnage that comes into our plant, the more efficient our building can be when we're processing recycling, and it can actually drive the cost down as long as people are doing it right. So it's really great to expand our service and be able to offer it to more people. And it's also keeping that waste from ultimately ending up in a landfill. So before we had the waste to energy and the recycling technology that we have today, all of our waste was taking up space in municipal landfills. Just a few, just kind of in short, some of the consequences of landfilling is that it's taking up the space for really valuable space for land, space that could have been a park or a school or a hospital or more housing, is just taking up space for trash, and creating these giant trash mountains out there in our communities. And nobody really wants one of those in their backyard. So that's one of the big barriers. We're also seeing methane emissions. So a very potent greenhouse gas. It's somewhere between 25 and 30 times more potent than CO2 when it enters our atmosphere. And that's coming out of our trash piles. So when you stick something in a landfill, one, it's not just disappearing, it's taking up a lot of space in a hole in the ground, but also it's creating greenhouse gases that are really not great for our environment, and it's ultimately causing global warming. So we're seeing issues with that. There's also leachate. So that's, basically the groundwater that's soaking up all that nasty garbage juice. That needs to be treated, and that's not a cheap process either, or very good if it enters our natural ecosystems or our water systems. Then we're also seeing pests and other vectors. So those That picture in my slide here is of landfill here in the state of Maine, and seagulls are very commonly found at that landfill, but you'll also find, raccoons, rodents. You'll see bald eagles in there scavenging for trash. I've heard some stories of residents interacting with bears at the landfill. So this is not a place where we want animals to be interacting and, ingesting food and maybe some other more harmful things. And then the last one, and certainly not the least, is costs. Landfills are very expensive. If you have to purchase that land, you have to, put in all of these environmental protections to make sure you're not leaching, all sorts of nasty stuff into the water or creating the emissions you might want to pipe into the trash and try to pull out that methane so you can harness it for energy or even just flaring it off. That's really expensive. And closing and capping those, you're not done at that point. You still have to continue to maintain those landfills for the years to come, decades to come. So when we're putting trash in the landfill today, we are essentially leaving it for the next generation to have to deal with and process. Which is why ecomaine really believes in the solid waste management hierarchy. But I'm also going to quiz you guys right now. Another issue with landfilling is that we don't have a lot of space left. So let's ask the poll, how many years do you think it would take to fill all of Maine's open landfills if we continue throwing things away at the same rate? So based on our current rate that we're throwing garbage away, how long do you think we have before all of our landfills are closed?
Yeah, as a Brunswick resident, I was sort of just made to learn that ours is only 30 years old or about that, and it's already closing. So they're really, that's just one lifetime, and all of a sudden, now we're in now we got to pay for maintenance. So they're just bad.
Yeah, landfills are forever.
They're forever. All right, so let's see. Give it a few more seconds.
I think we have a general consensus around, kind of where we're at. So I'll spoil it for you in just a second.
All right, I'm going to share the results. All right, so 59% said 16 years, 22 years, 26%, 29 years, 15%, and no one said 43 years.
Yeah, that was a good choice. So the real answer is somewhere around 22 years. So the 26% there, they had it. This is a chart. I actually made this based on the DEP's landfill disposal and capacity report. So they put that out. It's every other year now, but they report on how much viable landfill space we have and how quickly we're filling it up. And they look at a detailed breakdown by the state-owned landfills, so Juniper Ridge up near Bangor, the municipally owned landfills like Brunswick's, for example, the waste to energy ash fills, so that's ecomaine's ash fills, so they talk about our capacity and how much space we've got left. And then they look at commercial, so that's stuff like Norwich Walk is run by the waste management company. They've got their own landfill, and they're factored in here as well. So roughly by 2045, we are out of space. And then what are we going to do with all that trash? Where is it going to go? Are we going to, cut down more trees and create more space for more landfills in the state of Maine? Probably not going to be preferred. But another option that's not really great is sending our trash out of state. And nobody wants that. So I mentioned this a little bit before. ecomaine really believes in a waste hierarchy. This is something that's also implemented at the state level and the federal level. This waste hierarchy came out from the Environmental Protection Agency back in the 80s. So ecomaine's mission statement really kind of explains us best. We provide comprehensive, long-term solid waste solutions in a safe, environmentally responsible, economically sound manner. And the second part of this is really important, and also why I'm talking today. We want to be a leader in raising public awareness of sustainable waste management strategies. So we want to be ahead of the game. We want to be preparing for diversion and keeping that stuff out of a hole in the ground, because in the long term, that's going to do us a favor. It's going to be better for our environment. It's also going to be better for our bottom line and, the money in our pockets. So another question for you. We've actually got two questions here. So we'll do the poll. Thank you for those who have participated already. But the first question is, are you concerned about using reusable products like coffee mugs and, shopping totes because of COVID-19? So, do you have any COVID concerns about that? Yes or no, or maybe, I don't know, unsure.
I'm going to share now.
Right.
So it looks like by and large, folks are not, they're okay with using it, with using reusables, which is good. We asked this question because the science is evolving around it. And at this time, by and large, health professionals agree that reusables are safe so long as you take care to wash them regularly and just wash them. The virus is not transmitting via surfaces, and there's no documented case of that. So, and we just mentioned this because we all know that we're all here because we want to reduce waste and we also want to stay safe. So this is good. This has really changed. Last time we did this poll we did it in July, and the science was still out a little bit and it was a little more uncertainty, but now we have more certainty, and reusables are proving to be safe.
All right, and then the next question. So we'll put out another poll, and we just want to know, what disposal methods do you have access to? So some of the options here: do you have curbside trash collection, curbside recycling, or do you have to subscribe to those services? Do you have to, pay a hauler yourself to pick up your garbage and your recycling? Or are you using our silver bullets for recycling drop off? Are you bringing them to a transfer station? Or do you have none of these options? Is it, if there's something else that I'm missing in here, and you'd be none of the above, feel free to put it in the chat. And somebody mentioned they can only check one. So if you have curbside recycling, I'm going to assume that you also have curbside trash.
Yeah, sorry about that. If that was a function of the setting up the poll, that might be my bad, but it looks like people mostly have curbside trash and curbside recycling.
Yeah. And then transfer stations.
Transfer station. That makes sense.
Yeah, especially given some of the communities that we're seeing. So like Brunswick and Portland definitely has curbside services, but it may depend on where you live too. In Old Orchard Beach, I live in a condo and we don't have curbside pickup, but we do have a dumpster. And I don't actually have to bring my recycling somewhere else in order to make sure that it gets put to its best and highest use. Yeah, curbside composting is also another really great one. A lot of folks, that would be a subscribed service. So that would something that you would have to pay for that service to come and collect your food waste. But it's a great thing to have. Composting is really heavy and wet, and or food waste in your trash. And so if it's coming to ecomaine in our waste to energy facility, it's really actually making our process less efficient, because imagine trying to burn at 2000 degrees tomato sauce and watermelons and cucumbers and all of that really liquidy waste. It makes it less efficient and it makes it harder for us to actually do our job.
Yeah, and composting or food waste diversion is one of the best things we can do to stop climate changing emissions.
Yeah, that's a lot of that methane in the landfill.
Right.
All right, so we'll move on to the next one. So basically, no matter how your stuff gets to ecomaine, it gets to us one way or another. This video right here shows a curbside pickup for the city of South Portland. Their drivers don't actually have to leave their vehicle. They've got some really cool tech in their cars. So they can use a robotic arm to pick up their recycling and put it in one compartment of their truck. And then they put that recycling bin down, and then they grab the trash. They switch the compartment, so it's going into the trash compartment. And then they dump the trash out, and then they just keep on driving to the next house. So they never have to leave the vehicle. And the pickups are really quick. So if you're stuck behind one of those drivers, you're gonna be a little less frustrated than if it was there for a minute at a time and a minute at a time at each house. So it makes things a little bit easier. You're also pumping out less exhaust, which is great. And it also makes the workers very safe. Driving and hauling and trash collection is one of the 5th most dangerous occupations in the United States. It's got one of the highest rates of fatalities. Kevin Roach, our CEO, was doing a presentation last week, and he mentioned that I think the data suggests that a waste hauler or someone that works in collections of solid waste is killed in the line of duty once every week. So that's the frequency of how much of a problem this is. So we want to really keep them in their trucks, keep them safe, but it also makes things more efficient if we can do that as well. Somebody asked if our trucks run on biodiesel or vegetable oil. ecomaine doesn't actually have our own fleet of trucks. We don't do the curbside collection for our communities. Usually they contract that out to a hauling service, or they might have their own fleet of trucks. Like the city of Portland has their own trucks. So the folks that are doing collection for the city of Portland work for the city of Portland. They don't work for another vendor, like maybe like Pine Tree Waste or Troyano or something like that. So our towns contract that service out to someone else, and then we are just the destination for that stuff when it gets here. But we're actually looking at the only trucks we have currently on the road are our ash trucks that drive from ecomaine's trash facility here, where I'm sitting, and they drive 2 miles down the road to our Asheville. And we're actually getting 2 electric powered trucks that are going to be powered by the generation of electricity that we create here on the plant. So they'll plug in their trucks here at ecomaine, and we make our power through the burning of trash. So they're going to be powered by the trash that they're hauling over as ash. So it's kind of cool, little closed loop system that we've got going on there. We also have 2 EVs in our fleet right now for education and outreach purposes. So if we're going to a program, or if like I have to drive to an event so that we can have a table, we'll have our EVs there, and it's branded, it's beautiful. It says that it's powered by trash, and that's because it is. It's plugged right into our building, and we can drive on that for days and days and days. But yeah, so hopefully we'll see more of those, and we'll see more trucks that are, you know, switching to electric, and we're kind of waiting on the technology for that because it's very state of the art right now. I think we're going to be one of the first, first companies to get these trucks. So it's happening. It's just taking a little bit of a longer time because they're waiting on the tech. So we'll keep going, but no matter how your stuff gets to us, whether it's curbside, one of our beautiful silver bullets, this is actually one that was decorated as part of our art contest that we hold every spring. So if you're really artsy and you live in an ecomaine community, you can submit a design I think we put it out every April. And you know, we love to see diverse artists kind of coming up and submitting bits of work to help people recycle and make those containers really pretty. And then we also have, you know, just the standard bins. Like in Old Orchard Beach, this is what most of the curbside collection looks like. It's a recycling bin out on the side of the road. They got these beautiful ecomaine bins over here in this neighborhood, but those are just picked up by a hauler, and those ones can't be done with a robotic arm. Somebody's manually going out and grabbing those. But no matter how it gets to us, and then it gets dumped out on our tipping hall floor. So once it arrives here, it gets dumped out from that truck. That hauler brings it right to us, spills it out on the floor. It makes a giant mess. And then our front loader does the rest of the work to get it into the equipment. So he's scooping up that material, and then it's going to go through a drum feeder. It'll level everything off and make it easier for us to sort it. It's also just going to spread everything out nice and neat. And from that drum feeder, it's going to go through all of our equipment in 3 minutes or less. So this presentation is certainly not going to take 3 minutes or less, but you'll get kind of an idea of just how quickly things move through the plant once we see all of the equipment, because it's going to go through in 3 minutes or less and find its home and be in the right storage container so that we can sell it off and turn it into new stuff. And if it doesn't go through the first time, it will end up back on that tipping hall floor, and it'll go through again until it finds its home. And another thing to keep in mind is that this building itself, all of the equipment is powered by the waste to energy power plant right next door. So the first thing we sort out is our cardboard and our paper. So we're looking for those fibers and get those out because we get a lot of them. Paper makes up 61% of our total material that we're getting in from residents. And when you think about what you're recycling, it's generally paper-based stuff. So our rubber stars here on axles, and they're spinning, and the cardboard floats up and over, and the rest of the stuff is falling through. And if you can tell, there's some stuff in there that does not belong, and I'll talk about that in a second. But one thing I want you to watch for, is there anything that you see going on that line that is not recyclable at all. How about that bag of garbage? So things like that are big contaminants. We also get stuff like textiles. So you can see on this video right here, there's a bed sheet that's wrapped around, and there's a banner from somebody's 4th of July party. Those are getting stuck in the screens, and we call those tanglers. And those tanglers can cause some huge problems in the plant and can actually cause shutdowns. And they can also start fires. If you think about that bed sheet creating some friction, it could start burning up. It could create some smoke. And we've got kindling here. We've got cardboard and paper. It's all very flammable stuff that we're working with. So we have to be really careful about that. This is the paper sorting screen. So the rubber stars are really small, and we've got much more of them, and they're spaced a little bit, they're not as spaced out as our cardboard sorting stars, but these ones are sorting out the paper, and the paper floats over the top like popcorn and then falls right. The rest of the stuff is going to fall through. So the glass, the metal, and the plastic are going to keep going. You get a good view of it here, all those rubber stars as they're spinning. And the paper is floating up. You can see there are some tanglers in here as well. We'll see them in greater detail in just a minute. But here's the paper coming out. It looks pretty clean, right? It's got lots of good stuff. You see junk mail, you see the little inserts that go in your newspapers. And then here's those plastic bags that people may have recycled. When plastic bags come into our plant, it's not something we can accept. It's something we've been trying to kind of advise against for at least the last 3 or 4 years. And this is what happens to them when they come into ecomaine. They get stuck in those screens, they get tangled up, and then we actually have to shut down the equipment at some point because nothing can fall through when it's gunked up with those rubber stars like that. So we go in with box cutters and we have to manually cut out all of those plastic bags. And it's more than just plastic bags. Sometimes we'll see, like metal cable or rope or plastic strapping, again, the textile. So we'll see like bed sheets, we'll see clothing. Those things get wrapped around in there, and it makes it really, really difficult for anything to fall through. And it also just makes it difficult for us to, continue sorting the stuff because it could start a fire. So they shut that down. It could take them anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours to cut all of that out. But the best way to ensure that that doesn't happen is to prevent it from going in the first place.
Yeah, I just want to add, so that's like what a lot of recycling pros call wish cycling, is when they put things like banners or textiles in their curbside recycling bin, hoping that it gets sorted correctly and is disposed of correctly. But unfortunately, that's just not something our facilities can handle. And so that's when you hear the word wish cycling, that's what people are referring to. And also, we recognize that a lot of products like plastic bags have recycling symbols on them. And we'll tell you a little bit about how to fix that problem that's causing that kind of confusion a little later on with recycling reform.
Yeah, great point. But yeah, so this brings me to another point. So we were talking about wish cycling and, tanglers and all of that stuff. It's one thing to consider kind of the human element to all of this. We do have great equipment that's effective at sorting out most of our recyclables, but we don't have equipment that's ready and able to sort out all of that trash. We would need a different piece of technology to sort out dirty diapers and kitty litter and pieces of wood. And, that stuff's expensive. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the people who are responsible for cleaning up that recycling once it gets to us are our sorters working on the lines. And we want to keep them as safe as humanly possible. And in order to do that, we really need to kind of cut down on the wish cycling and educate our friends to do the same. So if you see somebody putting plastic bags in their recycling bin, maybe give them a friendly reminder or let them know that those are something that we just can't sort. We don't have the technology to pull them out and process them correctly. Carrie asked me how often we're shutting down to cut out those bags and other things that get tangled. And it really depends on how often, or how much we're getting into the waste stream. If we, just thinking in an average day, we're probably doing that at least 2 to 3 times a day. So, around their morning break, They shut everything down. They go take a 15-minute. When they come back, they're cutting out that stuff and getting ready to start fresh. They might do it again around lunchtime or in the afternoon, and they're going to do it at the end of the day so that the next day they're not starting with a bunch of stuff tangled up in their gears. So they're going to do it at least probably twice a day. But if they're getting lots of plastic bags, then it's going to be more frequent shutdowns. And as you notice, this is the first thing that we're sorting out. So if these pieces of equipment don't work and we have to clean them up and shut them down, we're shutting down the entire rest of the process. So we can't process any more material until we address this. But in the first place, we process the fibers first because it's the majority of our material. So if we can't clean up that paper, we're producing some really dirty recycling. So we got to make sure we take care of that stuff first. So another question came in, and I'll address that here. So tackling trash, we need a human person to pull out every piece of garbage that we see. Another thing that ecomaine does is we also have somebody on the tipping hall floor that evaluates each load as they come in. So somebody's dropping off a load from, let's say they're coming from Portland, or maybe they're coming from Gorham, or maybe even Augusta. And no matter how it comes to us, it's going to get dumped out on that floor. But we have somebody that walks around every single load of recycling that comes to ecomaine, and they're going to evaluate that load, and they're going to make notes on the types of contamination that they see. So if they see styrofoam, if that's a common problem, they're going to write that down. If it's, a lunch cooler, or, a filing cabinet, or a roll of carpet, they're going to make those notes so that we can educate our communities to make sure that they're getting that word out to the residents. And then part of my job as an environmental educator is to go out to those towns and educate on that as well, which is part of what I'm doing here. So, once you see it and once you understand that process, then it makes way more sense why we can't take rolls of carpet and filing cabinets, because eventually they'd have to go through all of this equipment, and it's just not possible. So we'll keep on going, but just an observation. So this is the tipping hall down here on the bottom right-hand corner. That's our CEO, Kevin Roach. He's I think he was for a press release or something that we were putting out to the public. But he was inspecting kind of the tipping hall floor and pulling out some of the things that he saw that weren't recyclable. And we can answer some of the questions about specific items that you might not know or have questions about at the end if you'd like. But yeah, so bulky plastics and things like that. Imagine those having to go over those rubber stars, or imagine something like a propane tank. Once those go through the equipment, there's a very high chance that it's going to get punctured and maybe combustible. And then we've got a really dangerous situation on our hands. So we want to be aware of that process when we're putting something in the recycling bin. And then remember the humans, remember the people that are working in our plant that have to sort out every piece of garbage. We want to make their job safer and easier. So we'll keep going. We're going to talk about the metals next. So attracting the right materials. We have ferrous metals and non-ferrous metals. So our steel and our tin, and then our aluminum. The steel and the tin get picked up by a magnet. Those are our ferrous metals, and it's just like Toy Story 3 if you've ever seen it. So your soup cans are going to get pulled up by a magnet, and then the magnet is got a conveyor belt around the outside, and that's going to drag the metal cans into the right bin. The next thing you'll see here is our aluminum or non-ferrous metals, and we use a different piece of technology because those don't get picked up by that magnet. So we use a reverse eddy current system that repels the aluminum in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like a charge of static electricity that's going to repel the aluminum into the right container. Again, this is where we want things to be empty. So like your soda can, if you're putting that in the recycling with a little bit of soda left in there, not only is that going to spill out and make things really gross for the recycling, but also it could make it harder for us to sort this stuff because that projecting the aluminum, if it's too heavy, it's not going to go where it needs to go. And the same deal with, our cardboard boxes. We want to make sure those are empty and not full of other stuff. Sometimes they get shaken loose when they're in the equipment, but let's say you put a paper bag and you staple it closed and it's got your recycling inside. That's not going to find its home where it needs to. The next process is our glass. So it's not recycled in the traditional sense where it's melted down to turn into new bottles and jars, but it is repurposed. So when we get glass at ecomaine, The markets are a little tricky for glass, and we can talk about that later if folks have questions. But regionally, there's really no processing facility that's taking glass bottles and jars and actually melting them down to turn them into new bottles and jars. So what we've done is we're actually taking the glass and we're breaking it in a closed metal box with metal stars. So kind of like our rubber stars sorting our paper, we have plastic and glass, and that's all that's left to sort. The glass gets shattered using the metal stars, and the plastics are going to float kind of like our paper did before. The glass gets shattered. It goes into a trommel until it's just the right size. It looks like just what we see here on the left side of the slide. And then we can repurpose that glass. So one example in the bottom right-hand corner, that's our bathroom sinks. Those are made from crushed glass and concrete. It looks a lot like this guy right here. So I've got a little sample of it in my video, if you can see. I've got another one that looks a little bit more like our sinks. So this is made with crushed glass and concrete, and it's polished off really nicely. So that's one way to reuse it. There are other ways that it can be reused. It can be used as aggregate. It can be used for drainage. Lots of other more like construction applications for it. But those are much better alternatives than throwing it into a landfill and having it sit there for years and years to come. And one of the other things you can do with your glass is instead of recycling it, we can reduce and reuse. Glass is a pretty awesome commodity, and I see a lot of value in it, even if it's not recyclable. So I reuse my glass. I donate my glass bottles and jars to my local refill store. I, try to share them on my Buy Nothing group in my community to let people take it if they need them for, canning or whatever it might be. But to repurpose that glass and give it a new life. Because even, if you have no use for that jar, somebody else might have use for that jar. So we can repurpose and keep that out of the waste stream altogether. Somebody asked, and I'll pause this because I'll come back to that in a second. Somebody asked if we use crushed glass for landfill cover, and the answer is no. We are reusing our glass, and in order for us to do that, we have to keep a separate pile of it where it's on its own, but we store it at our landfill space. It's got its own little plot of land just for glass. And folks can come and take it by the dump truck load. And we actually don't charge for that. If they have the transportation and the means to come and get it, we're giving it away so that it can find a better and higher use than getting, sent into the landfill. So we're not using it as alternative daily cover in our landfill. We try to find a better use for it. And construction applications, they want a lot of the stuff. So we've got to collect a lot of the stuff to meet their demand. So I think right now we've got a pretty decent pile, but we'll need maybe a couple more dump truck loads before we're ready for somebody to come and take that to reuse it. Somebody asked about buying a sink made from the crushed glass. I'm happy to connect you to our contact that took our glass. If you want, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Feel free to reach out and I can connect you to our contacts. But I know that there are lots of vendors out there that are doing stuff like this. So even if you just Google it, you can look up, recycled glass countertops. You can find some really cool options, and it's best to look, maybe in your local area and try to find a vendor that's close to you. So I'll move on from glass to plastics. I kind of got ahead of myself with this slide. But plastics recycling is probably one of the trickiest recycling options that there are. So for the commodities that we're dealing with, people have the most questions about recycling plastics. So I'll simplify it a little bit for you, and then I'll explain how we sort the way these materials, the way that we sort them. And if folks have questions, we can answer them as well. But the first question, it's a 3-question test for recycling plastics. You need to ask yourself a 3-question test. And if it passes all 3 questions with a yes, then it can go in your recycling bin. If it fails any of them, it means that it's not recyclable at ecomaine. Now, that doesn't mean it's not recyclable maybe at Hannaford, but it just means that it's not something that we can take and sort and turn into something brand new and wonderful. So the first question is, does it have the recycling symbol on it? Does it have a 1 through 7 inside? So you're going to look for that symbol and the chasing arrows and the triangle. We all know what it looks like. So that's the first question in the test. The second question is it a hard, rigid plastic? So plastic bags don't pass this test, right? We want things that are sturdy, they keep their shape. I can't stretch or rip that plastic. So even like your single-use water bottle, even though those are pretty squishy and they don't seem like a very strong plastic, they're still, by our standards, a rigid plastic that we can actually sort and sell in the market. And then the last question is it a container? So that's one that I think people get tripped up on. So, you know, this means that plastic toys are not something that we can recycle. Plastic lids by themselves. So I know that was a question in that poll, so hopefully that cleared that up for you. Lids by themselves behave like paper because they're light, fluffy, and flat. So those flat lids, they float over into our paper sorting screen and they contaminate our paper bales, unless they're attached to their plastic container. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But you'll want the, you know, if you've got an iced coffee cup from Dunkin' Donuts and you've got that plastic lid, keep them together and they can get sorted through the equipment just fine. But loose, that lid by itself is going to go into our paper and it's going to cause some problems. So those are our 3 questions. We do accept plastics 1 through 7, and we sort them by some of the numbers. So we sort out our number 1s. We sort out number 2s into 2 categories. We've got a natural color number 2 plastic and an artificial coloring or a dyed plastic. And that's things like your milk jugs. Your milk jugs are a natural colored plastic. It's not a natural plastic. It's still made from petroleum, but it's in its natural color. So that milk jug or your apple cider container or vinegar, those types of bottles are in their natural color. And then we've got colored plastic. So dyed artificially, like the light block milk jugs. So the ones that are white. Or your laundry detergent or your shampoo bottles. Those ones get sorted out separately. And then we can sort out the 3 through 7 plastics. And those are all baled together. So 3 through 7 are kind of lumped up into one bale, and then they get sorted on beyond ecomaine. So where we sell them, they're going to get processed again to separate the 3s from the 4s and the 5s from the 6s. And they'll get chopped up and processed individually, because each of these types of plastics have a different resin code. So if I'm looking at a plastic item, I'm going to look at the bottom of it, and it'll tell me right on the bottom, is it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7? It basically means it has this type of chemicals to help it do this type of job. So for example, I've got my peanut butter jar right here. I'm still gonna eat up all the rest of this peanut butter before I recycle it. But on the bottom, it says it's a number 1 PET. And that tells me that, I mean, a lot of these are like food grade plastics, but this tells me that it's got certain types of chemicals in it to help it do its job. And for the most part, PET containers are like for salad dressing or water bottles or mouthwash, those kinds of things that are suitable for food grade. Number 2 is a sturdy plastic. It's an HDPE container, and so on and so forth. So they all have their own special chemical names and they help them do their job. But it really comes in handy to know the chemical type for our number 1s because of the way that we sort them. So I'm going to play through the rest of this. This is a video of our optical sorter that sorts out our number 1 plastics. And basically what it's doing is it's scanning the plastics and it's looking for the chemicals that make a number 1 container. So it's looking for the PET chemical resin in there. I'm going to play that one more time because it's super fast. But it's scanning all of these plastics as they go through, and it's looking only for the number 1s. And when it finds them, it shoots a little puff of air to sort it out and separate it. I watch always down here for a bottle with a yellow top. There it is. It gets shot straight up. And that's how we sort those out. It's just a little puff of air, which is another example for why we really need to have containers be completely empty before they get recycled. Because that puff of air, if you've got, you know, a little bit of water in that water bottle, or if I tried to recycle this with peanut butter still inside, first of all, that could be really yucky. And second of all, this is going to be too heavy. So when the puff of air goes to shoot this in the right direction, it's not going to get where it needs to go, and it's going to fall down and get missorted. So our number 1s get sorted out that way because we get lots of them and they come in all different shapes and sizes. And then the rest of the plastics, so your milk jug, your yogurt container, your laundry detergent bottle, those all get sorted out by hand. They get sorted out by people along our conveyor line. So you can see that picture down here in the bottom left. So after everything gets sorted, we've taken out the cardboard, we've taken out the paper, the metals, the glass, the plastics. We're all done sorting. And then beyond that, each of those things get sent down to our baler, with the exception of the glass because it gets chopped up and it's all crushed aggregate at this point. And then we bale them up into 1 to 2 ton blocks. So think of Wally on supersized level. And these bales, this one's of cardboard, they're wrapped in a steel wire. And then we store some of them outside and some of them inside. The fibers, we don't want them to get too wet with moisture. That can make them hard to sell. So we store those inside for safety. And then we also store our laundry detergent bottles and those kinds of containers inside so that there's no chemical runoff. With laundry detergents and lots of those things, there's lots of chemicals that they use to clean. All those cleaning agents could end up in our water systems if we leave them outside. So we don't do that. You can see here our buddy Richard, he's the one that was flipping that around with a forklift. He's also inspecting these bales for contamination to give it one last look and kind of the final okay before we sell it. And then imagine it's truck day. We waited for the perfect opportunity to shoot this footage, but it's going into the back of a truck to go to Pennsylvania or New York or maybe Quebec to be turned into brand new beautiful cardboard. And you can see there's our waste to energy stacks right in the background. We're right next door.
Hey, Vanessa, earlier on, one person did ask where all the different types of materials go around the world, and if you keep track of where they go, can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, so I do not do any of like the purchasing of the bales. That's really a good question for our recycling plant manager and our recycling supervisor. Every order of material could go somewhere different. But the main point is that all of our plastics have domestic buyers. Either they're somewhere along the eastern seaboard here of the United States, or sometimes we might send them to Quebec for processing, depending on how transportation works out. If it's closer to send it to Quebec and we get a good price, then we might send it there. But for the most part, we really want to focus on domestic markets because domestic solutions are going to really help us with our circular economy and all that. So we want to invest in Maine, or Maine or local paper mills here in the United States versus sending it overseas if we can. For a long time, there was a dependence on overseas markets for plastics and paper. And that's why you see all of these documentaries coming out more recently to really look at those places and kind of measure how effectively that waste was actually being processed. We were really fortunate that we've always had buyers for our plastics domestically. We never had to send our plastics to China. We did have to send some of our paper to China when all of the New England mills were shutting down back in the early 2000s. So that dependence on China was very real, and it really hurt our markets and made it hard for us to sell recycling when they decided they didn't want to take stuff anymore. And the reason for that was largely because of contamination. So lots of trash in the recycling was making it hard for us to sell. These buyers that were paying good money for that stuff once upon a time no longer wanted the material. And with all the Maine mills shut down and not operable, we were relying on China. And then when they closed their doors, we really had to look inward and try to find more local solutions. So it's been an opportunity, I'll say. With the market crash, it's been hard. We've had to make some hard decisions. I know a lot of municipalities have had to make some hard decisions. But I think it has driven innovation to find domestic solutions in the United States to handle all of our waste and actually close that loop here in the United States with manufacturing and design and all of that kind of coming together in the United States. But yeah, so we've had local, Alabama, sometimes, like Ohio, New York, Massachusetts. We have mills and buyers for our stuff all over the country, usually along this side of the United States. I can't tell you specifically like where things go when, but our plant manager certainly could. So if you want me to connect you, feel free to, shoot an email and we can get a little bit more information about that for you. So the most important thing, we're keeping this stuff out of the landfill when we recycle. We are recovering, waste material, and that could potentially save us money if the markets are doing really good. But also we're creating really cool stuff with our unwanted, our unwanted materials, basically. So when we recycle, we're taking stuff we don't need anymore and we're letting it become something brand new. So for example, newspapers have lots of different applications. They can turn into egg cartons. That's probably something that I more commonly associate with recycling. If you have a desk calendar, if you look at the back of a desk calendar, it's got that really fibrous, like hard writing surface. And those are usually made out of recycled paper. You can actually see the fibers in it. So that's just something to check out if you're at home. Cereal boxes are another one that's usually made out of recycled mixed paper. So just check out that stuff. If you see the brown paper, you can usually see like the little squiggles of the old fibers in there. So that's just something to keep in mind. Plastics have lots of different uses. They could turn right back into the container that they were before, or they can turn into things like Frisbees. They could turn into plastic lumber. We have a park bench out front of our building that's made entirely out of milk jugs. There's a playground on Willard Beach in South Portland that's made entirely out of milk jugs. So that's kind of cool. I always tell the little kids that that's their homework after we do a presentation, is their homework is to go and play on that playground and really think about maybe how many milk jugs were used to make that playground. It's kind of cool. But yeah, lots of different applications for plastics. Again, if it's made of the right materials, it has a really good value after the fact. And it can save us from having to drill more oil to make more plastics. And then metals, they are pretty much infinitely recyclable. So, a metal can be melted down and made into a brand new metal can over and over and over again. Doesn't really lose its durability over time. So that's another good one to recycle. But you can make all sorts of stuff. I mean, they can make spaceships out of recycled metals. The applications are endless. So these are just some basic, examples of what your recycling can turn into. But even if you just go online and you look up, post-consumer recycled content, you can find, a product that you're looking for that's made with recycled content inside. And then if you're not sure about whether or not something's recyclable or not, there are so many resources for you. So one, for example, just remember your 3-question test for your plastics. That's going to be really helpful going forward. Another resource that you can use is you can download our Recyclopedia. So that's an app you can get on your smartphone. So you just go right on your smartphone right away and download the Recyclopedia app. But it's basically like the Google search of which bin do I put this in. So if you're holding something in your hand and you're like, is this trash? Is this recycling? Is it compost? Is it something else? Is it hazardous material? You can search from I think right now we've got over 1,200 items in there, and we add to that list all the time as people suggest items for us. So if you search something and it's not in here, there's actually an option that you can go in and suggest that item, and then we can get to work on it and try to find a solution for you. And it's not just a one answer kind of thing. If we recommend recycling, but let's say you don't have recycling, what's another option for you? Is that paper, if it's food soaked, maybe you can compost it. If you can't compost it, maybe it needs to go in the trash. But we really weigh out some of those options for you. And then again, there's an option there to suggest items and to contact us directly with your questions. And a few things before I kind of segue and let Chrissy take over some of the conversation about how NRCM is helping with this problem and how, folks can get involved. There are things that we really can't change right now, and that can feel really defeating. And I'll address some of them. We can't change the global markets and what's high value and what's not right now. But we can increase demand for products. We can buy things that are coming with post-consumer recycled content. Like we can get, brand new, straight out of, straight from the tree toilet paper, or we can get toilet paper that's made with recycled paper. We can kind of up that demand for recycled paper. We can't really dictate how other cities and states are managing their waste. We can't dictate how China, you know, may be polluting their environment with their waste. But we can advocate against, you know, the use of non-recyclable materials. We can support cleaner waste solutions for our communities, and we can lead the way. We can show, you know, a successful program and really be a model for the way that things are supposed to be, and hope that others will follow suit. You know, we can't control everyone else, but we can control our own actions and advocate for better policies in our communities, and hopefully that will inspire others to kind of jump on board. We can't control what materials are making money. So, you know, paper hasn't had a very good value in a long time, and we can't really do anything about that. But we can research what our local recycling facilities can accept, and we can recycle those things often and well. And just making sure that we're keeping contamination at a minimum, and we're really eliminating that barrier for folks to sell the stuff. Because again, remember, EcoMaine's a nonprofit and we're municipally owned. So when we cover our operating costs and we've, you know, paid our staff and we've paid for our equipment, that money that we make in addition can go right back into our communities. It goes right back to our towns. So when recycling markets are really good, it actually pays our towns to recycle correctly and keep that stuff out of the trash. It was like that for decades before the national sword policy hit, decades before COVID, and it can be that way again. But we have to really make sure that we're being thoughtful about what we recycle and making sure that we're doing it right. We can't control the amount of stuff that's already in landfills, but we can, you know, make decisions now to reduce what we put in the landfill by refusing to purchase or use non-recyclable items and packaging, voting with your dollars, you might say. And then part of that, if you can't afford to make that choice right now, I know that's, you know, that can sometimes be a barrier, is finances. We can advocate. We can write to those people that we're buying products from, and we can, you know, kind of really demand that they make those switches and say, you know, hey, right now you're putting all of this stuff in a plastic bag and I can't recycle that where I live. Could you please consider putting it into a container, or, you know, maybe selling it loose, maybe selling it without any packaging. So that could be another option for you. If you couldn't vote with your dollars and buy something that was a little bit more, you know, a little bit easier to recycle, you could advocate instead. And then I've got a few action items for you guys. If you want some homework today, or you're feeling motivated based on what you've learned from this presentation, there are 3 things that you can do today to help. And I know Chrissy has another one she wants to add as well. But if you're unsure about where your recycling goes, so if you check that list and you're not on our EcoMaine community list, you can check your town's website, or call, or write an email to your town's town clerk or your public works director, or call your town office and just talk to somebody and ask. So find out where your stuff is going. That's the first step, because then from there you can find out what the acceptable materials are and what they aren't. The next thing is, if you are in an EcoMaine community, we highly recommend you download that Recyclopedia app. So get right on your smartphone. You can do it in like 3 seconds flat. Just go to the App Store or go to the Google Play Store and look up EcoMaine Recyclopedia and download it on your phone today. And that way, if you ever have questions again, you can pull it right up, and it takes seconds to search. So that's another really good option. And then the third thing I want you guys to do is just to look at your trash more carefully. So, you know, sometimes it starts with an audit, like really doing a deep dive into your garbage. And sometimes it's just, you know, you're noticing or writing down things as you put them in the trash. You know, today you know, you can do it on your phone, you can do it on a piece of paper, but today I threw away, you know, 4 Ziploc baggies, you know, 5 rotten carrots, you know, all of these things. Just start keeping track, and then think about one item that you can swap today. And that will give you some sense of power, and then you can kind of build on that. So once you get into a groove and you've been maybe recycling this thing, instead you found a recycling option for it, that's awesome. You know, swap and make that choice, and then build some momentum, and you can add something else. But it's one good thing. You want to start with one, and then you can build from there. And hopefully that will give you the confidence to make, you know, better choices, and just to think about your waste a little bit more carefully going forward. So I'll turn it over to Chrissy, because I know she's got one more thing that she wants you to do, and then we can talk about this slide.
Well, thanks. Hopefully most of you here have heard about recycling reform. So this is where NRCM is trying to make changes in recycling and sort of work upstream a little bit, or a lot really, to change the status of recycling. Because, a lot of the things that Vanessa has talked about today, we can help make better, but ultimately we need the manufacturers of these products to actually think about recycling when they make them in the first place. Because a lot of the contamination comes from confusion, right? And so Vanessa's got this great little slide here. Right now, design is outside of the system, it's outside of the materials economy. Producers are not thinking with taxpayers or the environment in mind. So what NRCM has been working on for the past 2 years is implementing this policy known as extended producer responsibility. That's a little jargony, I know. So that's why we're calling it recycling reform. But it's a type of policy that's proven to work all over the world to increase recycling rates and make packaging more environmentally friendly. And what it does, it basically makes producers responsible. It makes those brand owners, so brand owners like Unilever, like Hannaford and Walmart, and all those brands that are out there, pay attention and participate in making products recyclable. And it creates a mechanism for us as taxpayers to hold them accountable. One of the problems with that facilities like ecomaine has is all of a sudden this new product ends up on the market, right? Or new product package, I should be specific, ends up on the market. So it might be some fancy bag that's actually plastic, but it looks like foil. It might have a paper layer to it, and the consumer doesn't really know what it is because it looks like all these different things and there's no proper labeling. So that's really not our fault as taxpayers, but we end up paying for it anyway. So what recycling reform would be to charge those manufacturers fees and say, hey, if you're not going to pay attention and make this recyclable or make it easier for Maine taxpayers and consumers to understand, then you're going to pay a higher fee. So it really creates that mechanism to make things more eco-friendly. It's something that's been done all over the world. Europe's been doing it for decades, and it's the only proven law out there to increase recycling rates well above 50%, which is what we need. One little statistic that we discovered last year is that if Maine recycled 50% or more of its municipal solid waste, it would be like taking 166,000 cars off the road. So it's not only an important waste strategy, it's an important climate strategy too.
Yeah, and one of the things too, and I saw some questions about this, so I just it would also potentially, this could be the start of conversations about toxicity in materials too, right? To make things less toxic and to make them out of products that are less harmful to our bodies and all of that stuff too. So somebody mentioned something about toxic linings, and so this kind of policy could really pave the way to making better materials that are healthier for us as well.
Absolutely. And they've done that in places like France, for example. They have, they've had their law for decades. And what they do, they started with a base law, and they've added to it over time to incorporate more of those values, like reducing toxicity, for example, reducing volumes, and just making them more eco-friendly. So, we really need to bring this type of law to the United States. Naturally, we don't have it here yet, but Maine is really leading the way. And we got very far in the last legislative session. It was voted out of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and it had bipartisan support actually. And but unfortunately, COVID hit, and we had to put it down for this session. But there's a ton of support. And one of the action items that you all can do is go to our website, which is recyclingreform.org, and I'll put it in the chat box, but I'll also send you an email about it tomorrow, and ask your municipal officials to adopt what we're calling the municipal resolution. It's an official way to say, we support this policy, and it's something that municipalities are inclined to support. The Maine Municipal Association does support it. Folks like ecomaine support it. It's very good for municipalities because those fees that producers pay go to municipalities to cover the cost. So it takes that cost off of taxpayers and puts it on big brand owners, and really targets those large corporations who are making millions of dollars while taxpayers shoulder the cost. So it's very good for municipalities, and those extra fees would go to help create system improvements. So if your community doesn't have curbside recycling right now, it could go to make curbside accessible to remote communities, or it could help recycling facilities upgrade their infrastructure to take new and different kinds of materials and that sort of thing. It helps for education too. We could finally educate, have a more consistent recycling programs across the state, because right now what you can recycle depends on where you live. So it would fix a lot of our problems upstream that's causing systemic challenges, really. So we really encourage you to pay attention to this really important law. We're calling it recycling reform. That blue bin logo is our logo for it. And we've got the website recyclingreform.org. And I'm here, and Vanessa's a great help too, to help you any step of the way in your advocacy for this law, because I really feel that it's the only way forward for recycling. It's the future of recycling. Most of the world does it, and it's the only way to make sure that recycling is secured for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, just from personal experience, I mean, we've worked with a lot of communities and a lot of, I think, more residents than anything that are living in towns that are not recycling a lot of their materials, and they end up having to put that stuff in the landfill. They feel really guilty about that, which I totally understand. But then again, I mean, it's the packaging that's the problem. It's the fact that it's made out of something that not a lot of people want to use. And so their municipalities have made the hard choice just to not collect that because it's costing them too much. So, you know, this type of policy makes it easier for everyone across the state to recycle all of the same things, makes it more consistent. And we can educate better to that. So when you move from town to town, if these products are made with good stuff that everyone wants, then ultimately, you know, the rules don't change depending on where you live. So it makes it much easier for residents. It makes it easier for educators like me. But and it saves taxpayer money. It saves municipalities money in their budgets. It's a win-win for our communities. And, you know, it certainly makes our jobs a lot easier. We're reducing contamination, because that mislabeling is, I think, one of the #1 causes of contamination. When we look at some of the major contaminants in our recycling facility, it's things like styrofoam, it's plastic bags. Sometimes we get things like textiles, and those, you know, kind of get thrown into the mix as well because they're tinglers. You know, it's all of those kinds of things in this mix, but plastic bags and styrofoam are our our top 2 offenders. So if we got better signage on those, better labeling, and, you know, better design, and maybe replacements of those packages probably would be the best thing. And maybe some changes to infrastructure. This money could, you know, that's paid by the manufacturers could also help go towards infrastructure to accept it. So if they're making a product and they want it to be recycled, then they can, you know, finance the recyclability of it and help ecomaine get the sorting equipment to, you know, to actually be able to recover it and get it into the markets that it needs to.
And hopefully one day we'll get to places like in Europe where they're so far ahead of us. They're looking at reducing plastic in the first place. I know a lot of people are here because they're concerned about plastic, and I am too. In Belgium, they've had this law for 30 years, and now they're putting pressure on big companies like L'Oreal to offer bulk packaging, so you could refill your shampoo bottle. You know, we don't have that here. You have to go to a specialty store to get a refillable shampoo, which is great that we have them in Maine, and I love them, and we should support them. However, you know, we need to scale up and fast, and these type of laws are doing that in other places.
And they're the innovators. Those refill stores are the innovators, but should they have to be? Probably not. So yeah, I mean, I think we all need to work together to kind of create the solution. And I think that designing packaging with the end of life in mind is definitely the most important thing that we can do right now with policy. And then we can go from there. We got to build some momentum and really start a partnership with these folks to create this program and get it, you know, kind of going in motion. But yeah, I mean, municipalities are struggling, and people are landfilling perfectly good reusable and recyclable items but the infrastructure is just not there for them yet. And so we need to really kind of advocate for that infrastructure.
Hey, Vanessa, so we're looking at, it's at 1:20 already, so we've gone over, and I think maybe it's time we get people asking their questions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, can I just skip right through a couple of the next slides? I want to make sure I get to the contact information and all that stuff too.
Great.
So yeah, we talked about designing and kind of considering that in the manufacturing process and all of that good stuff. You know, we talked about labeling and how that can be misleading. So I've got some photos right here of, you know, confusing, and then, you know, one example of good labeling here, which is the how to recycle label here on the right-hand side. So this one is pretty clear. It's one of those Amazon mailers, the blue and white envelopes, and it actually says right on there what you need to do to it. So they've got some pretty good instructions, but a lot of the time this is not the case. So this is one really great example, but we've got a series of not great examples here in the mix as well. This one says, place me in your curbside recycling bin. That's this Renew liner. It's light, fluffy, and flat. So where do folks think it's gonna go? It's gonna end up in our paper because it behaves like paper and it looks like paper. So those kinds of things can be really confusing, and we really wanna clear that up and get people recycling the right way, and keep it out of the recycling plants if we can't take it. Keep on trucking. So it helps us. It's going to save taxpayer money. It's going to define readily recyclable, which I think is really helpful. So helping us identify, you know, what can we market easily and what's really difficult for us to sell, and how can we encourage manufacturers to push things from packaging that's not easy to recycle to things that are easier to recycle, and maybe push them, you know, they could spend no money in this packaging reform if they made something in no packaging at all. If they did things package free and could label, you know, their product a little bit better and, you know, make it easier for the shelves without any packaging, that's the real win. So lots of benefits for us here, and feel free. I mean, I don't know if people have been screenshotting, but you're more than welcome to pull some of these slides if you want. And this will be recorded, so you guys can come back and find them.
And I'll email to you tomorrow too.
Yeah. So I do want to make sure I say thank you. Thank you guys so much for spending, you know, your lunch hour with us. It's really important to learn where your stuff goes. I think there's a huge gap between ecomaine and the public, and we're trying to bridge that gap with education. But we can't do that without champions like you guys who are taking the time out of your busy lives and you know, watching these presentations and learning all about it. So thank you so much for doing that. I look forward to answering all of your questions. I'm also going to leave my contact information up on this slide just for a few minutes if you want to take a screenshot, if you want to write it down. It's Vanessa Berry is my full name. Berry@ecomaine.org is my email. I've got my direct phone line on there. If you have any questions, you want to chat with me on the phone about, you know, packaging reform, or you know, if you're ever interested, maybe when, you know, things are a little less crazy with COVID, we'd love to take people on tours and do all that stuff. So feel free to get in touch. We're also on social media. Please also download the Recyclopedia. We'll do another little plug about that. But yeah, so I think we've got it, Chrissy. So if you want to go through some of these questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, thanks. Yeah. So let's if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you and call on you to ask your question. All right. Susan, do you have a question? No. Okay. Let's see. Did we answer everyone's questions? Could that be? I'm not getting anyone. All right. No video chat questions. Let's just see if there are any that came up in the chats. Now, maybe Vanessa, someone asked about solar panels. Do you guys have e-waste collection days? Would that be an e-waste thing?
I think it's more of a product stewardship right now.
Okay.
So I think because solar panels have been, I mean, they're multi-components. It's definitely got a lot of complex materials that are finite. So they want to recover as much of that as humanly possible, but we're not quite at the point where we're seeing lots of end of life for solar panels yet, because that industry is still pretty new. So I think that the technology is finally coming up to be able to recover and recycle solar panels. I've heard of a couple companies that are going to start being able to take them back, to kind of deconstruct them and recover the parts. But it's not something that we can process. I'm not sure about e-waste either. I think for the most part right now, there's like they're dealing with like regular circuitry and like computers and all that good stuff. But yeah, I think that solar panel recycling options are gonna become more normal and will be easier to find as the technology develops. I think that we're just kind of, we wait that game because we create a product and we're not really sure how we're going to recover it yet, but it's got a long lifetime. So I think sometimes that's part of it too. So recycling reform could help, and product stewardship could help that become part of the planning process. It's like, you better have a program to recover this when it dies, when you're starting to create and manufacture a product. So I think EPR will really help with that as well. Not just for solar panels, but for other types of technology.
So a couple of people asked along the presentation about caps. So like plastic caps or like metal cans.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about those components of packages and where they go.
Yeah, so caps, like if it's two different types of materials, so let's say you got a glass pickle jar and a metal cap. So those two things it's better to separate them. For our plant, we want things that we have like a size minimum and a maximum. So things smaller than the palm of your hand don't get sorted correctly in our plant. So a bottle cap or, that paper clip that we were talking about before, those aren't going to find their homes in our recycling facility. We need things that are, the size of a Post-it note, the palm of your hand, or larger, but not too large either. 5-gallon bucket, or, those are like the min and the max, right? So Post-it note and 5-gallon bucket are really our size requirements, because it's got to go through the plant. It's got to be able to clunk through all of our sorting equipment in order to find its home. We take some wonky things like pots and pans and stuff, but those little components, those can be tricky. So caps, if you can screw that plastic cap onto the plastic bottle, they go together. And then with plastics manufacturing and plastic recycling, when that leaves our facility, there is there's some cleaning processes there. There's some flaking processes. So they chop up the plastics into little tiny bits, and then they, while they're being washed. And one of the neat things about that is that plastics, because they have different chemistry, they float at different densities. So when they're going to recover, let's say they're sorting out a number 1 PET container. They chop them up. They've got this big tank of water where all the plastic is, and they're going to skim the top. And, for example, a number 2 plastic might float at a higher level than the number 1 plastic. So they skim that off, and then there's the number 2 plastics. They can go find a market for those elsewhere. It's a residue, but they can deal with it because it's plastic on plastic. For your pickle jar and your metal, the pickle jar is going to get shattered at ecomaine. So again, this is a good thing to think about what happens to the items and be aware of that when we put things in the bin. So the glass is going to break. The metal will have to go through the plant one more time, because if you remember in the order, we take the metal out first. So the best practice is to leave it off and put them both in the bin separately, because then, the magnet can pick up the metal lid, or the reverse eddy current can take care of the metal lid, and then the glass is going to get broken right after. So just think about that process a little bit. It's not, when we think about contamination, a lot of people get into the nitty gritties of all of this. But when you think about the big picture, a lot of what we're getting is people who are using their recycling bin as a second trash cart. So that's something that we experience pretty frequently in some of our curbside towns, and or sometimes we'll see it in the Silver Bullet, where people will put a bag of garbage in their Silver Bullet. So that's one of the major problems, is that we're seeing that people are using their recycling system as a second trash system, and not realizing, that it's not just robots and technology that's handling all of that. It's human beings. So definitely something good to think about.
That's awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. And Recyclopedia, well, you don't have to remember it all. Recyclopedia will tell you.
Yes, exactly.
We have, I think, two final questions. I'd like to wrap it up because we've all given a lot of our time, and we're just so grateful. So we have, Ken's asking about chemicals, and if you check for that, maybe you could quickly say something about that, and then we'll get to Carrie D's question. Carrie, do you want to ask that using your microphone? Okay, well, so let's take care of Ken, and then we'll get to Carrie, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Ken. The answer is yes. So we have an environmental manager here at ecomaine, and we have somebody that also does all of the health and safety. And part of that is testing. So we do ash samples very frequently. We also test our water runoff. So on a really rainy day, we'll go outside and we'll catch some of the water before it runs off into our little stream. We've got a stream that connects to the Stroudwater River. So we'll intercept that and we'll test it and make sure that we're not, leaching any, laundry detergent or whatever it might be into the water system. We also test our stacks, but we do ash sampling and leachate testing over at the landfill. And that's in conjunction with our environmental manager and the landfill manager. So they work together to make sure that those tests, we're testing the pH, we're testing the toxicity, all that stuff. And another good thing to keep in mind that the cleaner the stuff is that people are throwing away. So if we're throwing away our mercury thermostats instead of recycling them, or we're throwing away things that have asbestos in them, or, arsenic and lead and cadmium and all of those kind of scary metals, we are gonna likely see some of that in our ash. So we need to be aware when we're throwing something in the garbage, the environmental impact that that's going to have. Now, mind you, through, the combustion of materials, we can take care of a lot of the toxins just through the sheer, high temperatures in which we're burning things, much better than a landfill could. But again, we don't want that stuff in our natural environment. So we are testing, we do get samples of all of that, and we are reporting a lot of this information to the DEP and the EPA and all of those entities. So in short, that's, yes, that's true. If you have other questions about it, feel free to send me an email and I can connect you to our environmental manager for further information. I'll also put in a plug about education. I've seen a couple of school teachers commenting on this and people who have students. Please reach out to us. We do free education and programming for our communities. And if you want to do it online right now, we're pretty much making it open to anybody. So if you want a Zoom tour for your class, or you want to do a professional Q&A, or anything you can think of. We've got worksheets, we've got videos, we've got all sorts of online content. Please reach out to me. We would love to set you up, and we'd love to do something with your students. And then Carrie.
Great. Yeah, let's ask Carrie. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hello. So I am down in New York, so it might be a little different, but I think this is a pretty general question. I totally understand that like plastic bags aren't recyclable and they definitely get tangled. Any advice, or I guess more so, how do things get recycled? Like, I know I keep things individual, like a bin, and just put them in my curbside pickup, but like I see my neighbors will take out their recyclables in a plastic bag that's tied up. So does that all just go through as one and then have to get recirculated back through, and that just gets tangled up? I mean, I also think about like events where, you have your recyclables in the blue bag, as a separate situation. So can you just talk a little bit about how things that are bagged might be handled and best way to kind of go about mitigating that?
Yeah, and it does depend a little bit on your facility, what kind of stuff they've got set up for that. But I'll talk about ecomaines so that you just have a frame of reference. We have that one person that evaluates each recycling load on the tipping hall floor. But beyond that, we have no person out there, kind of as the first line of defense for material that comes into the plant. So plastic bags are bagged recycling or bagged trash. They look pretty much identical. So the problem for us is that when we see a bag of something, even a paper bag full of stuff, we don't know what that is. And there's a very good chance, we've actually kind of tested some of this theory. There's a very good chance, about a 60% chance that it's garbage, that it's just a bag of trash. So ultimately our staff is trained when they see bags of things they can't distinguish, that's going into the trash. They're going to deal with that as a contaminant. So again, for our communities that are getting contamination fees, it's by volume. So contamination is measured by volume. So if you've got bags of stuff, even if it's bagged recycling, the only thing in there that's a contaminant is the bag, but because it's bagged recycling, it takes up a lot of space. It's an increased contamination by volume. So even if you just had one grocery bag, it's less contamination than a bag that's got stuff inside. So it's problematic for us because we don't have the bandwidth to rip open all these bags. And we also don't really know what we're going to get when we do rip them open. So I don't know what New York's procedure is for that. They might have some sort of like debagging process. So it's good to ask. But generally speaking, bagged recycling that comes into our plant like that is not something that we can accept.
Just another note, a note about the bags here in Maine. So, you know, with our new plastic bag law that unfortunately was delayed because of COVID, the grocery stores that are accepting, they're going to have to accept film recycling now. So that was reinstated with the plastic bag ban. So going forward, as soon as that law is implemented, grocery stores are going to have to accept film plastics. So that wasn't across the board before, but that's one of the great things that came out of the passing of our plastic bag ban, is that grocery stores will take film plastics across the board now. So we're looking forward to that. And that's one way that you can recycle those film plastics in the future.
Yeah. And just a lot of people ask me about that too. Like who wants that stuff? What is it turning into? Plastic film recycling, again, like if it comes into our plant and gets tangled up in our equipment, that stuff is pretty much deemed worthless because it needs to be really pure. So the retailers have a good collection program set up where they're only taking plastic bags in one stream and it keeps it really clean. And then companies like Trex Decking, so this is just a sample of it, but this is composite decking, and this is made from plastic films and sawdust. So this stuff, it does have a market. It turns into some really good material, but it's got to be really clean. And we just can't hit that standard because when it goes into our facility, it's getting mixed with a bunch of different materials. And then we're expected to sort it out and process it. And by the time that we get a bale of plastic bags, it's got paper in it, it's got other types of plastics, and they really need them to be clean. Like your plastic, mailers, that Amazon mailer, you have to rip off that label because the label will make it harder for them to melt down the plastic. If there are receipts in that, it makes it hard for them to recycle. So in order for Trex to want it, it has to be really clean stuff. And there are other, manufacturers that take plastic films and buy them and use them for their materials. But this is just one example and one I had a sample of. So
another example of how with recycling reform, the onus will be lifted off the consumer to remember all of that, and more of the responsibility will be put on the manufacturer to communicate that so that we don't just have to remember all this, because it's a lot. And thank God for Recyclopedia, which can really help reduce that burden, but not everybody has access to it. So whose responsibility really is it? So
exactly,
that's what, again, recycling reform, if you want to become active and advocate for that, recyclingreform.org, we'd love to have you help us get that passed. Thanks, Vanessa. And I think it's time to wrap up. We've gone over. I really appreciate the 15 of you that are still on after this hour and a half. We love so much that you stayed and asked such good questions along the way. This will be recorded. We're going to email it to you tomorrow. We're also talking about maybe doing a third because this has been so popular. And again, we'll email you about that too, so you can share it with your friends or family, or if you loved it, you can watch it again. But I think we'll end it here. Any final words, Vanessa?
No, just another thank you so much for, dedicating your time. And, I think we've got some great recycling champions in our communities. And as long as you just let your neighbors know, let your friends know, share the information. And, when COVID dies down, we'd love to see you all for a real facility tour. And, some of our events that we have, like our annual open house that we have every September. It's all really great stuff. We really want to make sure that we're getting the information into the hands of people who will use it. But thank you so much for your time. It's always such a pleasure to get to present this stuff. And if you have other questions, you've got my contact information, so please reach out. it's very important to us that people do it right. And if there's any opportunities for us to be able to get in front of an audience, and if you have ideas or you organize groups and want us to do a talk, then always feel free to send an invite. We'd love to be there.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.